Mahalo everyone, and welcome to another Christmas deck video here on the Jolly Scarecrows channel. You're with me, Joe, and I'm going to be presenting today Fluffal Despia, which is a combination of a old Go Second fusion archetype and a brand new one that is going to take Yu-Gi-Oh! By storm, I predict, unless they do something about it, because it's ridiculously powerful. Even competitive Despia decks are actually including things like Frightfur Patchwork and Edgimp Chain because of how good searchers they are. And so I thought I'd take that kind of one step further and include in some more of the Fluffals and Frightfurs that will really help you win turn 2. So in terms of where to really start with the deck, the Despia cards essentially all revolve around fusing. We're running a lot of one-offs in this, which can look kind of scary, but honestly, it is actually quite consistent. And this thing, I'm a bit of a jester of Despia. Despias are themed around despair and thespian, so they're all kind of theatrical-based cards. You can hopefully see a Christmas theme there, maybe stretch to it with Christmas pantomimes. This card, for example, it both lets you search for a branded spell or trap, and it has an effect which helps essentially protect fusions. The branded opening lets you take a Despia monster from your deck and special summon it. So again, you open up with this, normal summon it, and then you can immediately special summon anyone from your deck. And then also you can remove this from the grave to protect one of your fusions. You can special summon things like this, Dramaturge of Despia. So essentially, if you fusion summon when it's on the field, you can negate the effects of one of your opponent's monsters, and if it's used as fusion material, you can special summon it. So really, you're kind of always wanting to try and use this as fusion material, so that you can keep it on the field to negate any of your opponent's annoying monsters. We then get to a kind of biggie, Fallen of Albus. So your aim really is to try and bait your opponent's negates until you're able to get this off successfully. When it's normal summoned, discard a card, and you can fusion summon using your opponent's monsters. So it's a super poly, but and it actually has a slightly specific effect in that you can't use other monsters you control, but the fusion monsters, which we'll get to in a minute, they often involve a light or a dark, so your opponent's often going to have some of those available. And the last of the new monsters I'm going to go through is Spring's Kit. Essentially, if you have a fusion monster on the field with Fallen of Albus as material, and that's going to happen pretty much all the time, you can special summon it, and that lets you add another one of your branded spells and traps. So you're constantly searching for these branded spells and traps, and I've shown you one of them in opening. Fusion is outrageous. Okay, it lets you fusion summon monsters from the deck, and yeah, you can only play one per turn, and everything you play after that has to be a fusion from the extra deck. So we're running a pretty much exclusively fusion extra deck. But yeah, you pretty much have immediate access to nearly all of your kind of non-Frightfur fusions, and that is incredible when you consider that two of them, this one, Albion the Branded Dragon, and the white equivalent, which is, where is that? Here. So we're only running one of these, the Searing Dragon. So this is discard a card, do another fusion summon. By shuffling monsters in your graveyard, and even face-up banish cards back into the deck. So you can fusion summon this with something like Branded Fusion. Discard one, fusion summon into Albion, and Albion will let you fusion summon again into another thing, which again allows you to use the graveyard to make that fusion summon. And so you have access to maybe things like this Iceblade Dragon, which lets you banish a monster per turn, by throwing something away from the extra deck. You have Guardian Chimera is in here. You have another Despia, which lets you banish one of your opponent's kind of extra deck monsters and special summon it to your field, so it's a ridiculous level of field clearing. And then if you want to go for back row stuff, you can often go into the Fright Furs, and particularly Fright Fur Tiger. So when it's fusion summoned, target cards on the field up to the number of fusion materials used and destroy it. And so my kind of strategy with that is try and load the deck with, load the graveyard with Edge Imp Sabers and a bunch of the Fluffals, and that will allow you to pop back row components. So kind of really the Fluffals are in here to kind of as an engine and to get themselves started. So to do that, we're basically running a minimal version with 3 bear. So Bear's effect lets you discard it to add Toy Vendor, which we're running 2 of. Toy Vendor, discard 1 card, draw 1, and if it's a Fluffal, you can special summon it from your hand. This doesn't happen too often in this deck, but the discard effect isn't as bad as it sounds. We're running quite a few of them, and that is because this card, when it's into the graveyard, add an Edge Imp Sabers or Fluffal from your deck to your hand. Pretty good. And then Edge Imp Chain, when it's sent to the graveyard, you can add a Fright Fur card from your deck to your hand. And that Fright Fur card can either be Patchwork, one of the best searches in the game. It lets you add an Edge Imp monster and a Polymerization, so you can get rid of Chain, and you're immediately paying for that cost because you can get it straight back again and a Poly if you want to do a fusion. Honestly, often Poly is only used at the last resort. We're running 2 of them. For the most part, we're fusion summoning using Branded Fusion or Fright Fur Fusion, the other card you could select, and that lets you fusion summon a Fright Fur monster from cards in your graveyard. So even if you don't happen to have an Albion on the field to make that graveyard fusion summon, you can easily search for Fright Fur Fusion to make it. And yes, so we're running Kraken and Cruel Whale. Often you won't really be playing these. These let you pop 1 card per turn, but what these can do is help you load up your graveyard to play Sabertooth. If using one of those graveyard effects like Fright Fur Fusion. So this requires a Fright Fur Fusion already, and a Fluffal and Edge Imps. And if you use 3 materials, it can't be destroyed by battle or card effects. So it's really useful to kind of get that out. If you're unable to beat your opponent on that turn 2, then this is one of those monsters you want out. Another one is this. So often you can kind of cripple them in terms of life points, but you might not be able to get it over the line. Well, you have Masquerade the Blazing Dragon to help you here. So it requires just 1 Despia monster and 1 Light or Dark, which pretty much all of the deck is. The only cards that aren't fit the bill are some of the Fluffals, so Bear, Dog, which we're running 2 of. It can search any Edge Imp Sabers or Fluffal monster from the deck, so you can basically use Dog, search for Chain, discard it with your many discard effects, and that will let you search for Patchwork, so you can see how easily these things snowball. Yeah, Masquerade the Blazing Dragon. So your opponent must pay 600 life points to activate cards or effects. So depending on what you're playing, you can just set this up. Even if you haven't been able to beat your opponent turn 2, they often won't have the resources to be able to make a successful counterattack on you without, without running out of life points. In terms of some of the other monsters we've got in the deck, we have 1 copy of Dolphin. Essentially, this lets you, again, recycle some of your fusion cards. This is probably one of the weakest cards, I'd say, in the deck, but it is always nice to have an additional Fluffal monster to search for, or potentially discard a Toy Vendor. It does let you target one of them in your graveyard and set it, and you can activate it then in that turn, and lets you send Edge Imp Sabers to the deck. So Edge Imp Sabers, most of the Fright Fur cards require any Edge Imp, but Fright Fur Tiger, the one that pops the back row, requires Edge Imp Sabers. So that will often be the one you're trying to send. Sabers itself, great card. You can basically add a duff card from your hand back to the top of the deck and special summon it in defense, which which can be useful for making kind of plays with poly. In terms of some of the remaining fusions, so we've got Quertus here, so this lets you basically turn all of your opponent's monsters to 0 attack, and then you get to kind of special summon a Despia from the deck if it goes to the grave or Albus. And its effect works when it's normal special summoned, so you can see how you can basically put Quertus there, and if it is destroyed, you can bring out the Albus, and as long as you have that card to discard in your hand, you're able to fusion summon with your opponent's monsters there and then. So super powerful in terms of negates. Guardian Chimera, again, this is another thing that can help destroy back row. Dangerous Frightful Nightmare. Honestly, you don't use this one that often, however, it is a really nice way of just loading that graveyard with Fluffals and Edgimps to then use an Albion or a Frightful fusion. It is quite costly because it takes 2 Fluffal monsters, and so often you'll only be using it from the graveyard anyway, really, but it does have a nice kind of disrupt effect when your opponent activates a card. The targets, you can banish a Frightful to negate it. So that's kind of the other reason why we're running a few more of the not so good fusions, things like Cruel Whale and Kraken. The last Despia monster to talk about is this one. So this is often a really good one when your opponent has a well set up board. You're able to bait those negates, and then the Fallen allows you to get this. So you need the one Despia, the light and the dark, and yeah, be able to special summon monsters to your field can really help turn the tide of a game. If you thought there was enough fusioning in this deck already, we've got 2 other fusion spells which are searchable. We've got Branded in red, which lets you take a Despia or Fallen or Albus in your graveyard, add it to your hand, and then you can immediately make a fusion summon by banishing those fusions. It can't attack directly, but it's a quick play, so you can disrupt your opponent's turn with that. Paradise Branded, so this means that your fusion summons can't be negated, and the effects that you'd activate to make a fusion summon can't be negated too. So this essentially just, you end up with basically doing a chain where you special summon kind of Rebellion, Albion, and maybe Ice Blade or another Misc fusion monster in a row, and you're just able to safely make all of those. And yeah, incredibly useful to have this card out, and plus it's searchable by the effects of the Jester. And the last one in this deck is the Despia Field spell. And we're only running one because yeah, it's mostly searchable with Jester and with all the other cards. And it allows you to make a fusion summon, and it also means that when your fairy leaves the field, and the majority of this deck that isn't the Edgimp cards are fairy. Don't think Springer's Kit isn't, but most of the monsters, especially the ones that maybe you sometimes leave out, things like an Albus. Then you get to special summon a fusion monster from your graveyard, not just straight away. And as we've seen, actually some of them, these effects only work actually when they're fusion summoned. So you're wanting it to be, bringing back Ice Blade or some of the Frightful ones, rather than the dragons. I think the last card to talk about really is the Predaplant. Honestly, you don't go into it that often. In fact, you might be wondering, how you made a deck without kind of super poly in it, and it doesn't really need it because you've got that form of Albus. That pretty much performs the role of super poly without you needing it in the deck, and then it's nice to kind of not use that space because your discarding a lot already, so having another discard in there probably takes it too much over the edge. Oh, I realised I did miss a card. Albion the Shrouded Dragon, so often... so this name, basically you kind of want this in the graveyard quite often, and if you have it in your hand, you can discard it to send a branded spell trap to the graveyard, and obviously you want to spend in the opening, because this has the graveyard effect, which protects your fusion monster when it gets destroyed by effect, so that can include wipes like Lightning Storm and things, and it's just fusion monster, so it can protect them all. And yes, obviously useful for being able to make Fallen of Albus summons, and if it's sent there from the hand, you can special summon it, so you're often able to make Fallen of Albus fusions if you don't have access to this card for whatever reason, but the only reason that would be is if it didn't get an Aluba or a branded fusion, or various other things in your opening hand, which is quite unlikely with the way we're running the deck. I wanted to include Frightful Sanctuary in here because I thought it would maybe fit the theme a little bit more. But again, it's a discard and it requires 2 Frightful monsters to be sent to the graveyard. But it does mean that all of your fusions will be treated as Frightfurs, so even though this kind of ends up playing often with, say, 75% Despia, well, you'll just make everything Frightfurs. Is there a benefit of doing that? Well, Egypt Scythe provides graveyard protection for Frightfurs. So, yes, there is. And Frightfur Fusion. I'm not overly certain that will work, actually, but because it works only on things you control, but I like to think it is. But yes, Egypt Scythe can protect. So, I think that will be it in terms of the deck overview. We will have a few duels after this, just to show you how strong this is. Honestly, compared to the some of the last few decks we've done, this is incredibly powerful, able to knock out opponents quite easily. Turn 2 with room to spare. Next video should be out on Boxing Day, and we'll have a Battle in Boxer deck for that. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy the festive period, and I will see you for the next video.